Hello everyone. So today we're going to look at Abraham from a Kabbalistic perspective, which is unique in that we are going to look at Abraham and events of his life, other people at Abraham's time, not in the context of him being a historical figure from 4,000 years ago or stories about him where we'll get into all kinds of people and places and geography from a corporeal perspective, but rather from a spiritual perspective, meaning that we seek to find the Abraham that is within us, and all these characters in the stories of the Midrash and the Torah within us. What does it mean? That Kabbalistically we define these stories of the Torah and of the Midrash as inner processes taking place within the person, and it's relevant to us on our spiritual progress. We can use these stories as guidance for what we should carry out spiritually as internal actions within us in order to raise the importance of the spiritual desire over our corporeal desires, and by doing so, attain spirituality. We'll talk about what that means as we get into it. We already looked into some stories about Abraham in a previous episode of Kabbalah Explained Simply a few weeks ago, where we looked at his birth and infancy, talking about that in the context of the birth and infancy of the spiritual desire within us, how it starts looking at the egoistic desires that were prior to it as being something that opposes its nature and its development. And today we're going to look at more advanced stages of the spiritual path, meaning later stages of Abraham's life in the context of our inner spiritual development. And we're going to start with the story about Abraham shattering the idols, and we'll look into some others. So all that in this Kabbalah Explained Simply. I'm Markos, and we're going to get into it right after this. The spiritual meaning of Abraham shattering the idols in Terah's store. What is the meaning of this story? We're going to just start reading from some excerpts here. So here's the story. Terah, who was Abraham's father, who represents a previous degree of development, meaning, what's a previous degree? Terah represents a certain kind of egoism upon which sets the basis for the spiritual desire to grow. So you could think of Terah as our previous egoistic desires and what we look forward to with them, what we look forward to in them, what we want to get out of them. That's this idea of Terah, that is the previous degree always means some kind of egoistic desires that predate our spiritual desire, that set the foundation for our spiritual desires to grow from. So Terah was a manufacturer of idols. He once went away somewhere and left Abraham to sell them in his place. A man came in and wished to buy one. "How old are you?" Abraham asked the man. 50 years old, he said. "Woe to such a man who is 50 years old and would worship a day-old object," Abraham said. On another occasion, a woman came in with a plateful of flour and requested him, "Take this and offer it to them," meaning to the idols. So he took a stick and broke them and put the stick in the hand of the largest idol. When his father, Terah, returned, he demanded, "What have you done to them?" "I cannot conceal it from you," Abraham was telling him. "A woman came with a plateful of fine meal and requested me to offer it to them. One claimed, I must eat it first," meaning one idol claimed that I must eat it first, while another idol claimed I must eat it first. Therefore the largest one arose, the largest idol, he took the stick and broke them. And then Terah said to Abraham, "Why do you make fun of me? Have they any knowledge?" Terah said, "Should not your ears hear what your mouth has said?" Abraham said. Yeah, so what's this story about? What does it mean that Abraham's shattering the idols and then mocking Terah, meaning it's his father in the story? We understand that as our previous egoistic degrees. So idol worship, internally it means living to fulfill only our egoistic desires. So that's the previous degree which we emerge from, our Terah, our egoism, all these desires. We have our base survival need desires, as we talked about: food, sex, family, money, honor, control. Food, sex, and family. These are our individual desires, which we have at every single moment of our lives, regardless of whether or not we're integrating in society. And then we have the social desires that emerge upon them for money, wealth, honor, respect, control, power, knowledge, fame, all these desires that emerge due to our social interactions, where our egoism is more expressed, because all the social desires is fundamentally me enjoying at the expense of others. I need to draw from society in order to enjoy in a certain way. So idol worship means that we live solely in order to fulfill our lives at the level of those desires. And why does he mock them? Abraham, as we said, it's the birth of the spiritual desire. It's the spiritual desire in the wisdom of Kabbalah. It's called the quality of Bina. Bina is one of the 10 Sfirot. It's one which is concerned solely with bestowal, solely by wanting to give back everything to the source force from which created it, wishes to be just like the altruistic giving spiritual force, completely one-directional giving. That's this spiritual desire that emerges within us. Since the spiritual desire emerges within our egoistic desires, it doesn't become clarified as precisely as only, we don't feel the spiritual desire and immediately start thinking, now I want to go out and I want to give to everyone, I want to love everyone, I want to bestow to everyone. Rather, the spiritual desire emerges, as we said, as a point. It's called a point in the heart. If we think of the heart as the totality of our desires, then the point in the heart is this small point that emerges within them, a small seed of a desire, which starts making us feel as if all our desires up until now, all our egoistic desires, self-serving desires, they haven't given us the fulfillment that we really want, because now we have this new desire which wants something else. It's not clear to us what it wants yet, but it feels that all these other desires before it, all this idol worshipping that was taking place before it, that we went out trying to think that making money was the meaning of our lives, or that getting fame and respected in society is meaningful in our lives. All kinds of materialistic, egoistic goals that we set ourselves up with in life. This new spiritual desire that emerges in us makes us see their futility, makes us see their fragility, that there's something about them that doesn't give us lasting fulfillment. Just a little bit more about how this works from a Kabbalistic explanation. So we have our desire to receive, which is often drawn like this, just for the sake of diagrammatizing it. If we receive into the desire to receive, this egoistic desire, pleasure, where we have some source of pleasure, which the Kabbalists say there is a single force of nature, which is constantly bestowing, constantly wishing to bestow pleasure, to give enjoyment, fulfillment, happiness to all the created beings, to each and every one of us. And each and every one of us has this desire to receive pleasure, this desire to enjoy, nested within us, always wishing to absorb, to draw into ourselves. So that's this here. So that can be thought of our natural, inborn, egoistic desire to receive. And trying to fulfill it only for my own personal benefit, only for myself at the expense of everything outside of me. So that leads this pleasure to come in and dissipate upon reception. We receive pleasure into our desire to receive, which is our nature, which is human nature, our egoistic desires, which base every single pleasure that we go for in our lives. We receive that pleasure inwardly, and it dissipates. It gets extinguished. It goes out. It fades away. The common example of this is food, that you're hungry, you want to eat. The moment you start eating is the moment you start extinguishing that desire, and at a certain point you don't want, you've emptied that desire for food, you've fulfilled it, and it keeps coming back later and later, and it shows the transience of our desires, our corporeal desires at the level of this world. And so Abraham comes to mock precisely not the desires themselves, but that we place importance on them, meaning the idol worshipping, the fact that we're willing to go and give and exert in these desires, as it showed in the story, that people are coming willing to give money to such idols, meaning that we're willing to exert in our lives to make, for example, making money, or the goal of our life, or, going out to become respected as our main goal. He says that there's a certain futility here, because all at the basis of it, all these desires, we are left empty. Another simple way of seeing this is that eventually we end up with our lives. We end up dying, and we have no memory of everything that we did in our lives. Everything kind of fades away, and it's as if we went for all these things and we didn't go after something eternal, something spiritual, something that's everlasting, something that is beyond this transient, going after one pleasure to the next existence. That is what Terah and idol worshipping and going after our egoistic pursuits in our lives, our material pursuits. So this is the spiritual desire in us. That's the Abraham point that emerges and sees the futility of working in our lives to just fulfill our egoistic pursuits. So then we go on, just to summarize this point. So Abraham shattering the idols and arguing with Terah. So what it means is this desire for spirituality emerging within us, discovering the fragility, the futility of living to fulfill only our egoistic desires. Now we'll go on a little bit more with some other stories of Abraham further on in his life. There's a part after that where, due to this view, Abraham was put into prison for 10 years. So prison represents the darkest and innermost part of our ego. If we think of prison, it's a place where we are put into some area where we're seemingly alone, that we are away from society, where we are trapped, we're enslaved. What's prison? It's a lack of freedom. We don't feel any kind of freedom. We feel that there's some kind of freedom outside of this prison cell that we are incapable of accessing. That's a prison. So what does this mean in terms of us internally? Also, it's written that Abraham, when he was put into prison, he was put into the bowels of the earth, into a dungeon. That also means something, that earth, or land, in Hebrew it's eretz, it means the word desire, ratzon. It stems from the same Hebrew linguistic root as the word for desire, because when we're hearing about the earth or the land, or that Abraham was put into the bowels of the earth, into a dungeon, deep into the earth. So it's talking about that Abraham, he came out, he expressed the desire to bestow, he expressed that desire for spirituality in a certain context, and then each time that we make a certain rise, one step up spiritually, each time that we're able to, for example, make a decision that we're going to, whether that decision is some kind of disregard of moving toward our egoistic pursuits, and now we want to somehow look for how we connect to an environment that grows our spiritual desire into a fully flourished spiritual desire, one where we can develop that intention to bestow upon our egoistic desires to receive. So every time we make a decision in that direction and make some efforts in that direction, we end up, as it says, into a prison. We end up in a deeper state of the ego, because our nature that we were born with is a desire to receive pleasure. It's an egoistic makeup that we have. That's all we have. 100% of our desires are egoistic, and it's just this small tiny seed, this small tiny point that is a point in the heart, which is a spiritual desire, which represents that point of Bina from above, which is called Abraham. That's only a very tiny, like a tiny, even smaller than an atom within us, compared to this huge sack of ego that we were born with, that we were raised with, that all of our environment and examples growing up supports. So when we encounter some kind of motion forward, some kind of inspiration where we are drawn and where we push forward in a spiritual direction somewhat, the next step is feeling that we are immersed in that ego, that we can't get away from this ego, that it's our nature, that we feel that we dropped, you could say, even deeper. So we make one step forward in a spiritual direction, and it's almost as if we feel as if we take 2 steps back. This is the feelings of a person who's actually making spiritual progress, that we move in a direction of connecting with, if we go back a bit to this picture, we connect to this environment with the teacher, the group, and the books, which from which we get the guidance, and we are able to draw the forces, the spiritual forces upon this desire, which nourish this desire. The spiritual forces we draw, if we take it back even further, let's say we're involved in this environment of teacher, group, and books, and we're studying with a certain intention that we want to develop our point in the heart, to develop this desire for spirituality into a fully fledged desire that can bestow just like the source force of nature bestows towards us. Source force of nature, by the way, it's called the creator in the wisdom of Kabbalah. So just as the creator bestows and is a quality of bestowal and love, so we try to emulate that, and we put ourselves into an environment that allows us to draw the forces that enable us to do that. Why do I say draw the forces that enable us to do that? It's because us, in our own egoistic makeup, we don't have the ability to nourish and build this spiritual desire within us into a full intention to bestow, into a full desire for spirituality that's realizing its goal, meaning entering this spiritual world by ourselves. It's outside of our reach. That's why we need to put ourselves into a spiritually conducive environment, which the Kabbalists define as is being comprised of these three means: the teacher, the group, and the books, through which we study books by people who have attained those higher states. It's called books by Kabbalists or Kabbalistic books, in a spiritually supportive environment, meaning other people who also have this same point in the heart, people who have a certain awakening to rise above the egoistic desires, which first appears as some kind of criticism on only going to fulfill our egoistic desires in this life, that there must be something much more important and meaningful to life than fulfilling my egoistic pursuits, than just making money in order to support a family, and just to for example, even bigger egoistic desires that I see some kind of futility in just going out to be respected and to be overpowering over others, etc. So we develop this desire in among other people who share this common drive for something else beyond this world that they are willing to invest in. And with a teacher's also one who has attained the higher spiritual states and who is able to guide how we approach such aspects as the group and the books in order to make those motions forward and be able to rise above our desire in an intention to bestow, to realize the ultimate goal of why this point in the heart was put in us to begin with. So feeling that we're in prison means that we make a step in that direction. We add to that environment in some kind of way. We either strengthen it or strengthen our connection to it in some kind of way. We've gotten some boost of spiritual inspiration, that point in the heart, some kind of forces are awakening to it. We make a motion, we take a step in that direction, and then we feel in the next step we've actually progressed. As you can see here, it's moving in a progressive line, but we feel, we go under the ego. We're feeling some kind of, you could say, bad sensations, something negative, as if we're not moving forward. We feel immersed, that we're in the ego. And this process keeps continuing. Then from that we come out and rise even higher, and then we keep progressing, but we go even lower. One way of thinking about this example is like a wheel that turns around. So there's a part where the wheel is moving forwards, and there's a part where the wheel is moving in the opposite direction, backwards. And that's this motion. It's always going forward. Whatever the wheel is carrying is always moving forward. But there's this forward motion, and there's this kind of backward motion towards this constant movement forward. And that's how we progress spiritually too, that we make a motion in the direction of wanting to become more spiritual, just to put it shortly, to connect with that environment that educates and inspires about rising into a field of love and bestowal, which is the source field of nature, which is called the creator in the wisdom of Kabbalah, to make a motion in that direction. And then in the next state, we feel as if we're imprisoned, that we're locked in our ego, that we can't get out of this egoistic quality, which is our nature. And it's in order to bring us to a true, sincere desire to make a final leap into spirituality. We go through many such discernments, go through many ways of seeing all kinds of forms of this ego that's working in us on this process, on this journey where we're moving forward. And that's also described in later stories of Abraham too, of this kinds of states we reach. And toward the end of this state where Abraham's in prison, he was sentenced to be burnt by fire in a furnace. So we'll read a little bit about this and also talk about that. So after 10 years, they sent and brought him, meaning Abraham, forth, and cast him into the furnace of fire. And the king of glory, it's talking about King Nimrod, king of glory, meaning that he's a king, he represents the full expression of these desires for wealth, power, respect, that these are really, that these desires are the biggest corporeal desires we can possibly have. This kind of, it sets the environment, having these desires before the emergence of that spiritual desire that comes after them. Just a little bit about this point. So we're talking about King Nimrod, and how Abraham came while King Nimrod was king of his kingdom. And just going back to what we discussed also in the previous story about Abraham. By the way, if you're interested in the previous one, just go in the description of this video and you'll be able to go and watch Abraham about his birth and infancy and connect that into how it relates to desires playing out within us at every moment. So we can also relate these things, just as we're talking now about individual spiritual advancement and how this point in the heart emerges within us and how we connect that to a spiritually conducive environment and move forward, and the stories of Abraham and how they connect to that. So we can likewise also see this process, because what takes place individually also takes place collectively on a general global scale at the level of humanity. So similar to how this spiritual desire emerges in us within our egoistic desires, and when our egoistic desires are grown to a certain extent, which is represented by King Nimrod when they actually grown to a full extent, meaning when the desire for money is this huge desire for wealth, you could say a greedy desire for wealth, and when our desire for respect is really out there to be known as like the divine ruler. You know, there's stories about King Nimrod where he's demanding that he be treated as divinity, where people really bow down to these desires and these pleasures that are in the form of wealth, in the form of honor, respect, and power. You know, really, he's the king of this whole region, the Ur of the Chaldees. It represents that a certain height of egoism that needs to come about before the next level of desire emerges. And we can also see that on a global scale, that both the book of Zohar and also Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, Bala Sulam, the most renowned, greatest Kabbalist of the previous century, they pointed to the year 1995, meaning from the end of the 20th century onwards, as being the time when in humanity as a whole, the desires would reach such a major height, really big egoistic desires, that people would start feeling that they're already starting to become overblown. And that's when they predicted that the spiritual desire, the point in the heart, would start emerging in humanity en masse from the end of the 20th century onward. And that's also how we can see this process playing out, not just this, how Abraham emerges as this spiritual desire among all of our desires, which starts making us want to rise spiritually above their egoism as we interpret it individually. But we also see in humanity en masse that among the humongous egoism that we can see in, you could say, all of humanity's material pursuits, so we've also reached a certain quenching of these desires. The more we progress, we see that ideologically we're not really progressing. You could see we're progressing very much technologically, that science has become less about discovering what's the meaning of our lives, and more about how can we find all kinds of new technological solutions to all kinds of problems that emerge in our lives, etc., etc. In short, there's we can see how there's this massive ego that is also expressed in humanity on large. You can think of that as the King Nimrod in the story. And from the year 1995 onward, from the end of the 20th century onward, when this question, what is the meaning of life, and more questions about the meaning and purpose of life, existential questions, would start appearing more and more among more and more people. So that's like the point in the heart just emerging in humanity en masse. And that's why there's been this movement for lots of people starting to study different teachings to what they were raised with. Eventually, many of them come to the wisdom of Kabbalah as well, simply because there's this period of materialistic, overblown, egoistic desire, coupled with this emergence of the new spiritual desire, where we start feeling that there's a certain emptiness around. It's also why you can also see that from the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's been much more exponential leaps in phenomena such as depression, loneliness, emptiness, stress, because we're feeling this new desire popping up within us. It's still not clarified. It's not a desire like our other egoistic corporeal desires where we see a clear destination for this desire, meaning we don't get the spiritual desire and all of a sudden go, that's it, from this day forward, I'm going to leave behind everything in this world and I'm just going to go and, I want to become like the creator who's a quality of bestowal. It doesn't come up that clearly. It comes up more just like this additional empty space around our egoism that makes us start feeling that our egoism isn't feeling everything within us like it used to. And so all these phenomena emerge: depression, loneliness, emptiness, more drug abuse than ever before, more suicide than before. All these kinds of phenomena, and then all kinds of frustrations that emerge in society, etc. So all this comes about because this point in the heart has got this revelation en masse in humanity, and it's looking for a solution, but it's still undergoing this clarification. It's still within the egoistic desires. It's still playing out there. We're still experimenting, trying to see what we can get out of this ego in the process. So it's nothing comes that linearly in spirituality. Everything is very integral, and we start moving into, from a linear progression of human development that we were once in, moving from one desire to the next. It's as if now some kind of new seed has been dropped within that, and it's starting to play out and stir things around and complicate things a lot. So that was just a little bit about how also this story about Abraham and all the stories about Abraham as a spiritual desire emerging within us can also be seen on the level of all of humanity, that this desire also comes out among all the desires. So let's just keep going a bit. Now we're talking about being sentenced to the furnace. So after 10 years they sent and brought him, Abraham, forth and cast him into the furnace of fire. As it is said, and he said to him, I am the Lord who brought thee out of the furnace of the Chaldees. Another verse says, Thou art the Lord the God who didst choose Abraham and brought him forth out of the furnace of the Chaldees, And in another place, Behold, I will cast you into the fire, and let your God whom you adore come and save you from it, Nimrod said. Abraham descended into the fiery furnace and was saved. So there's a story of being sentenced to death by fire, being sentenced to burning. What is this death by fire? It's a little bit contrary to what we might normally think of as death by fire. That death by fire, it means that there's more light and more pleasure than our desire to receive is capable of receiving in order to bestow. That needs a little bit of an explanation. So if we go back to this portrayal of how we move forward spiritually, how each time we make a step towards spiritual progress, wanting to connect into that environment that educates and inspires about spirituality, and then feeling that we are again immersed in our ego, and then again we come out of it higher, and then we again feel as if we're more immersed in our ego, and we keep more moving in this direction more and more. So eventually there comes a state within this progression, a more advanced state, just like this story about Abraham being sentenced to be burnt by fire, to be executed by burning in the furnace. So that comes at a certain level of our development where it's actually a very high spiritual level, where burning by fire doesn't mean, like with everything we're learning, it doesn't mean that in our material reality, physically, we're being sentenced to be burnt in a furnace and burnt by fire. What it means is that the amount of light, if we go back to this example, light is the force that extends from the source force of nature. It could be thought of as the pleasure that extends from up there. So if we, Let's try to get a more suitable color. So this light, this pleasure which is extending from the Creator, being sentenced to death by fire, it's a certain state where, for example, after we are immersed in our ego, as it says, 10 years in prison for such a long time, and we've made all these efforts to come out of it and to deal with that and to be focused on the area where we are free and not on the area where we are enslaved. The area where we are free is where we are in the intention to bestow above our egoistic desires, and we are enslaved within our egoistic desires. So after this comes a more advanced state where we are sentenced to be burnt by fire, meaning that the full revelation of the Creator, or a much heightened revelation of the Creator, much more pleasure than we were ever capable of receiving, comes to us. As we said, this is a very high spiritual degree. We're just kind of mentioning it here to show how there's a certain spiritual progression here that takes place, and this is what happens at a higher degree. So, and if we're not ready with our intention to be able to bestow that pleasure back to the Creator, so what we develop on the spiritual path, what that spiritual desire turns into on the spiritual path, if we think of this one as like killing us, death, what's death in spirituality, or killing? It's when the desire enters the ego, it's when the pleasure or the light enters the egoistic desire directly, and then the pleasure gets extinguished within the ego. It's as if it goes into an empty space, and it extinguishes. It gets quenched. That's the killing of the desire. We kill it. So, in order for the desire not to get killed, in order not to die by this pleasure, to be killed by that fire, we need to develop the intention to bestow, which is done by developing this special tool, what's called a screen or a masach in Hebrew, which allows us to give that pleasure back to the Creator, which allows us to be in a certain balance with the source of nature that's constantly bestowing upon us pleasure. So instead of it going directly down here, we are able to reflect the pleasure and give it back. And in this quality here, that's our intention to bestow, that we acquire upon the desire to receive. So being sentenced to death by fire is some new degree where it's as if much more pleasure comes down than we were ever used to or ready for, and that pleasure overflows our ability to give it back and enters here and burns us. But Abraham came out of that alive, which means that Abraham represents this ability to bestow so much, to really be in equivalence of form with that force of bestowal, with the Creator, at such a level where even that being sentenced to death by fire, one of the highest possible ways we could be detached from spirituality, even that doesn't detach him, meaning Abraham sought this source force of nature, sought the one force that exists in reality above all of these different egoistic forces, you could say the idols, above all these other forms of rule. King Nimrod, who proclaimed that he's the divine presence in the world, above all these multiple forces that present themselves to the person at every single moment. If we stay with that path to only seek that there is one source force in nature, in reality, above all of these forces, and keep working to acquire and to express our desire to be like that force, which is a force of pure love, bestowal, wanting only to benefit everything that it created, all of the created beings. And if we try to become like that force in our intention, because we can't become like that force in our desire, because our desire is fundamentally opposite from it, but if we try to apply an intention to bestow back to that force and work to develop that direction back to the force as it has towards us, so then we're able to realize that quality which is called Abraham, which represents a full desire to bestow, a quality in us which is able to come and reach that full revelation of that one force in nature, because it requires the same level of being able to bestow back to it upon all the conditions that come to it. So that's what this story is about, Abraham being sentenced to death by fire, execution by burning, and that he comes out of it alive. And then we go to a section from the Torah. Up until now, we've been reading all kinds of midrash, the oral Torah. Now we get to a significant part of the written Torah. Now the Lord said unto Abraham, Go forth from your land, from your relatives, and from the home of your father, to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. So, go forth from your land to the land I will show you. So remember, land is desire. So go forth from these egoistic desires there. Abraham's seeking that one force in reality, and this written part of the Torah is the first time that force, that Lord is actually speaking to him. He's at a level of communication where he's able to hear direct instructions from that force that he's seeking. So when we're seeking that one force that sources everything in reality, it tells us to go forth from our land to the land I will show you, meaning you leave your egoistic desires behind and start developing above them in the spiritual direction, that we start developing that intention to bestow back to the Creator as the Creator has towards us. And then the Creator will show us that way to, as long as we keep going in that direction, we'll be shown how to navigate ourselves upon this constantly growing ego that's playing out at every moment of our lives. Yeah, so this is just it in a diagrammatic form, that we are innately a desire to receive pleasure. Every single one of our desires wishes to receive, and if we apply the intention to bestow to that one force that exists in reality, so we get that direction to go forth from our land and to the one that the Creator will show us. And then there's this part at the end where it's like, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. So that means great, it's not how we perceive greatness in our world, but great in a spiritual sense is one who acquires the intention to bestow and can love others above the desires to receive that grow within. That's considered great. A great one in Kabbalistic terms, it's also called a Rav. In Kabbalistic terms, a Rav is the word for great in Hebrew. So it's considered one who has attained that intention to bestow, and one who's got the ability to guide others to be able to acquire that too. So being a great nation, it's attaining this quality where you see here it's like license for Abraham to be a teacher, because then he went on to be a teacher of the nation of Israel. That comes later on. And that's what makes this nation great. Again, it's also not a nation that's got a biological foundation, but one which is based on this idea of a spiritual idea of being able to rise that spiritual intention, the desire to love and bestow above our innate desires to receive, and in that they become a great nation, anyone who connects into that direction. And then they will receive blessing. What's a blessing? A blessing is a force that descends from above, that develops the intention to bestow above the desires to receive. So we get such a force by our efforts to wish to be like the spiritual force itself. The more we try to be in a direction of loving, bestowing, giving, positively connecting, just as the force of bestowal is towards us, just as the Creator is towards us. So then we get that blessing, we get that help, which allows us to develop that intention upon the desires to receive. So this is just a few things that you could say. Some of the main takeaways here is just to understand that what we read about in these stories of Abraham, Kabbalists interpret them at a very deep inner level, where they see it as being our inner desires undergoing this process of this emergence of a spiritual desire within us, with that spiritual desire having that name Abraham, and our development of that spiritual desire into a fully fledged intention to bestow upon our desire to receive are all these processes that Abraham goes through in his life. We talked about it in the previous episode, which is linked in the description, where you can see about his birth and infancy, which is the first stages of the emergence of that desire, and putting it into an environment that spiritually grows that desire into that intention to bestow. And then we see further states here of shattering the idols, mocking our previous egoistic desires within us, being imprisoned, meaning we take a step forward in spirituality and then we feel that we're more and more immersed in the ego, and that's part of our spiritual progress, until it reaches a state where we really feel that we're up against some major pleasure, which is that death by fire sentencing, where we are incapable of receiving all that. We're afraid of being able to receive all that for our personal benefit, all that pleasure that comes from the Creator. And the key is to keep being connected to that point of Abraham, to that point of bestowal above all these receptive desires that are constantly coming to detach us from spirituality. As you can see, there's many forces in these stories which are trying to break down Abraham, and he just keeps staying with this one force and keeps coming through. And then through all that, he ends up getting instruction from the Creator, from the Lord, as it says, to leave all of his egoistic desires behind, to go and rise above them, with the force of the Creator. That will make him a great nation, and will get blessing. Abraham was the father of the nation of Israel. Israel as well comes from the words Yashar El. It means a people who are straight to God. Yashar means straight, El means to God, meaning that they also share that same point in the heart, that one that Abraham represents. And they follow that point in order to being able to rise above the egoistic desires, to reach a state of love your friend as yourself, love thy neighbor as thyself, as it's written. It's written elsewhere, love will cover all crimes, or love will cover all transgressions, meaning that we rise above our divisive desires to receive, our divisive, egoistic, self-serving desires, into a common love among one another, and also with the source force of nature sustaining that love, which is that blessing that we just learned about, that if we make efforts in that direction, we also get instruction from the spiritual area, and also we receive blessing, which gives us the ability to be in that state, meaning it's not only in our own power to do it, but we need to receive also help from above in order to do it. And here we see you could say the spiritual meaning of Abraham's life come about, just in a few stories we dabbled in now for the sake of this. If you want to get more deeper into it, so that's where we recommend also going to sign up to Kabbalah. Kabbalah, it's where you can find all kinds of courses on all kinds of topics, where you can get deeper into the material about Kabbalah. If you follow the links in the chat and the description, so you'll be able to go and sign up directly to what's called the Kabbalah Revealed course. If you start there, you'll already be able to start for free and take that course for free. And then there's a continuation there, where if you want to continue, there's a free trial membership for 14 days at Kabbalah, and then you pay a membership fee to get access to, really it's like a Netflix of spirituality, all kinds of courses on all kinds of topics in relation to Kabbalah and spirituality, what we talked about now. As I said as well, if you want to follow through with the Kabbalah Revealed course that's linked here, so that's a great course for getting to learn the basic concepts and fundamental principles of the wisdom of Kabbalah. There's a part 1, and then you need to access after that to get a membership for part 2, where you go through more of this is really a complete roundup of the fundamental principles of Kabbalah. And then if you want to keep progressing, so there's further courses that start giving an introduction to more practical aspects of Kabbalah, and preparing you to be able to even join what we said in the beginning about that spiritually conducive environment, that at Kabbalah, at later stages, you can really join an environment where there's much more live lessons taking place regularly. And also one more thing I just want to mention is that right after this Kabbalah Explained Simply right now, so we have a Q&A session for an hour on Zoom as well. So if you do join our course at Kabbalah, or if you're already a member, I know lots of you are already members, so we'll be joining for a much more intimate session now, right after this on Zoom, where you can ask any questions you have about this material, where you can also ask any questions that you have in general that you want Kabbalah's answers to. It's quite a free and very inviting place. I look forward to seeing you all there, and look forward to also seeing you next time. Thanks a lot.